Last week when I said I thought that the box of race that we were examining last week was going to be the heaviest box we could ever possibly carry in our lives because that was so institutionally ingrained in our society that we have a lot of trouble getting beyond it, even when we think that we're beyond it. I was wrong. I was wrong because as I started to research this week to talk about the box of gender that is in front of us, I began to realize how little I actually know. And I think I'm pretty hip. I think I'm pretty on the spot. But last night at dinner, we took Steve out for dinner for his birthday last night. His birthday was last week. We finally got to take him out to dinner last night. I said to my daughter, who is in that millennial generation, and her very wonderfully gifted intellectual boyfriend, I said, so tell me what I should say tomorrow, talking about the box of gender. And they both just looked at me like I was an alien from outer space and started laughing. And her boyfriend said, well, that's a can of worms to open up, isn't it? That's just a can of worms to open up, you know? Because, you see, we've lived with what we now know is called a binary division. I'm sure that some of you may have heard binary division. You've heard that term in our common nomenclature. We've lived with it because of the fact that when the Bible was written, it was written with that binary system. God made boys and God made girls, and it's going to stay that way. And it was also written because it was written by one of that binary, men. It was written with men being in the hierarchical, patriarchal position of women, right? So imagine my shock when I'm researching gender this week and I find a church website in California. Now, as I said last week when we were talking about race, we all seem to think that all the liberals in the world live in California, right? I found a church that stated right on their website, women, you might be equal to men, but you are below them. You are to submit to them. They are to lead you. Ooh. Yeah. Right? Not good for me. Not good for me. In fact, I had thought about starting off this sermon this morning, having that old way that they used to do things be done here. And I was going to say, if you are a man, sit on that side of the sanctuary. And if you are a woman, sit on that side of the sanctuary. If you identify as a man, sit on that side of the sanctuary. If you identify as a woman, sit on that side of the sanctuary. You know why men would be on this side? Not only because Glenn is taping me right now with Facebook Live, and I didn't want him to have to move, but because the pulpit is right there. The men are the ones on top, right? They get to go to the pulpit. So if you are men, if you are so firm in your patriarchal, hierarchical place and secure in that, please raise your hand if you would wear a man bun. Eric would. Man bun. Woo! Man bun, right? Right? Because you see how stupid it gets when you start to talk about this binary division? Men can't wear their hair like that because that's what girls do. Girls can't work on cars because that's what men do. But we have lived with that all of our existence, and now we're finding out that perhaps maybe all of our existence has been suspect and incorrect. Now, I don't mean to make light of this situation at all. I'm going to admit and own right out from the get-go, I'm just beginning to learn about gender in this world. All my life, I have grown up thinking that I'm a girl, right? I'm a girl because my brain and my below the waist match. But there are people in this world whose brains and below the waist don't match. They don't go in sync with one another. In fact, did you know that on average, 2 babies a day are born anatomically with both sexes? Did you know that? That's 1 baby in 2,000 births. 2 babies a day are born with that piece of confusion to start off their lives. I've lived with the privilege of thinking I am a female, I am a girl, I was born a girl, and I'm a female, I'm going to be a female for the rest of my life. I identify that, but why have I had that privilege? Because I am a cisgendered white female in the United States of America. I have that privilege, right? But I have encountered times when cisgendered, which means you identify with the gender you were born into as a biological sex, cisgendered men have reminded me that being a woman was less than. Here's just a couple examples. So, I was taught when I was first in the ministry that I was always going to have to wear a robe. Okay? You know why? Because your bust will distract people, Jana. Put on that robe and become genderless. And when I said to this very male pastor that I worked with, well, does that make you genderless? No, I'm a man. They are going to know I'm a man. Okay. Another cisgendered white male pastor told me I could not wear sandals in the summertime. You know why? Because my toes were going to distract the men during worship service. You saw what happened when I took my shoes off. Those kids didn't want to see my feet, right? Right? Yeah. But you see how we've lived with this binary. I'm a man, you're a woman, I'm a woman, you're a man, and nary the twain should be meeting. But now we know. Now we are beginning, just as I said, just beginning to understand that there are folks that have walked among us for time immemorial who in their hearts and minds have felt female, but they were born a male. We know that there are folks who have been born females, but inside of them, they have felt like a male. And what makes my heart wrench is that even when we do deal with the binary, the male and the female, we allow women to have more male characteristics than we allow men to have more feminine characteristics. You know, my working on a car, I was seen as a tomboy, right? I was seen as a tomboy, and that was okay. Until I put on a suit like this and somebody said, oh, I see you follow a certain politician who likes to wear suits everywhere, right? When I put on a suit that is more of a man-cut suit, that wasn't okay. Men, little boys. I listened to a woman by the name, what was her name? Batya Greenwald. She's a kindergarten teacher, and she does a wonderful TED Talk. Little boys, she used this phrase, we crushed them out of being anything feminine. That's the word she used. We crush them. Because they're taught, don't cry. Big boys don't cry, right? We don't want them to play with dolls. We want them to play with trucks. And we want them to be aggressive. Because we value in our society aggressiveness, being on top. And we allow white, cisgendered men to have that value more than we allow any other male to have that. In fact, we value that in white, cisgendered men so much more than we value it in African American cisgendered men, that we elevate white males above African American males in terms of aggressiveness and assertiveness. And if we see an African American male being assertive, we will find a way to say he should not be like that. So needless to say, I feel like a total incompetent person standing here today talking about gender, because our society and in my life, I have heard most of my life this binary designation. But if we're going to get rid of the box of gender, we're going to have to talk about all of these people that are in the middle of the binary. And one of the problems that we have with talking about who's in the middle of the binary is because we have, as a society, broken down male and female as polar opposites. Girls can be more like boys. Boys can't be more like girls. They are polar opposites. And we've assigned power then to both of those poles, and we forget that there's an awful lot of people in the middle here. In fact, that same pastor who told me that I had to wear a robe for the rest of my life so that I wouldn't be distracting to the opposite sex is the pastor who then said to me, stick with me because you don't want to be with all of those women pastors over there. You don't want to be with them. In fact, they had not nice names. This group of men had not nice names for the group of women who disliked them just as much as the men disliked the group of women. But he said to me, you come be with us. Don't follow or don't try to interact with them. What is that in our society? We use our gender as power in the society. And if you are anything other than those polar opposites, male, female, cisgendered, you don't count for some reason. If we're going to burn down that box, if we're going to burn it down, we have to understand something very elemental about the box. Last week when we talked about the box of race, one of the things I forgot to say was this very wonderful line by the hip-hop artist Lecrae. Lecrae, as he wrote the foreword to Jamar Tisby's book, The Color of Compromise, said, the box of race is just that, a box that we created. And if we are ever going to get beyond it, we have to unmake the box. In other words, we have to take it apart. We have to burn it down. Same thing happens with gender. If we are ever going to get out of the box of gender, we are going to have to uncreate it. We're going to have to burn it down, get rid of it. And what I learned about unmaking that is something very elemental. When we're born, we don't know what gender we are. Did you know that? When we're born, we don't know the gender we are. It's assigned to us by our binary system in our society. A baby is born, they look down, it's a boy. A baby is born, they look down, it's a girl. And from that point on, we begin participating in the system of gender oppression that says, you were born with girl parts, you were born with boy parts, you can only have trucks, you gotta wear pink. But did you know that the most popular male color in the Victorian era for men was pink? Yeah? And baby blue was for what? Girls, right? Think about this. Think of all those times in our history when men dressed up in tights and dresses and wigs and put on makeup and all of that sort of stuff. They were the fashionable dudes in the world, right? But you let a drag queen walk in this church and some of us are going to break our necks looking, right? We are so locked in the binary, boy, girl, that we have to begin to realize that even if we think that we have gotten the right gender in our lives, maybe we haven't. Maybe we were born with female parts, but all of our lives we've felt like boy. Maybe we were born with boy parts, and all of our lives we've felt like a girl. And that's not even touching on gender expression. Because do you know, you can be a cis white female and still dress like a boy. Did you know that you can be a straight white male and still wear a skirt? You see how much we don't know. Now let me tell you what was confusing in my life. I'll tell you a little confusing story in my life. I was told all my life I was supposed to have been a boy. You're supposed to be a boy. The doctor said you were going to be a boy. The doctor said I was going to be a boy based upon the exact same reason the doctor told me that my son was going to be a girl, right? Heart rate. Any women here that had children many, many years ago, older than me, remember being told by the heart rate of your baby growing that was what would determine your sex? Imagine that my heart rate was really, really slow. I know you can't. I know you can't imagine that, right? I'm making up for it now. My heart rate was really, really slow, and the doctor said to my mother, you're going to have another boy. Sent my dad over the moon. that there would be another boy because he was kind of disappointed in his first one. And I wasn't a boy. So imagine, all my life I was just like, okay, I was supposed to be a boy. Should I act like a boy? Am I supposed to be? I was born a girl, but should I act like a boy, right? So when I'm pregnant with my son, and the doctor said to me, his heart rate's really fast. You got a little girl in there. You got a little girl in there. His heart rate's really, really fast. This was as short as 36 years ago because he's going to be 36 soon. So what did I do? I started buying all kinds of pink stuff for him, and purple and lavender and frilly stuff, and hiding it in the closet from my first husband. And he's born, and she said, I kid you not, oh my God, it's a boy! She literally thought it was going to be a girl born that day. Luckily, I had had the experience of being told you were supposed to be a boy all my life, so I didn't say to my son ever, you were supposed to be a girl. He didn't have to deal with that. But think of those folks in our world who are stuck in that box of gender, and they're being harangued every single solitary day that you are supposed to be this. And they know that they're not. And think of those folks in ages before now who were told they were mentally ill, that it was actually a DSM mental disease diagnosis to be thinking that you were a transgender person. And what did they do? Do you know what the treatment was? Conform that aberration to the gender they were assigned at birth. They were only assigned gender based upon our binary system that says boy parts equals boy, girl parts equals girl. We realize from our scriptures today that Jesus probably didn't deal with this very often, but we also know that there are long histories of Native American histories who talk about the two natures, those born into the tribes who presented as both male and female. And the two natures were, anybody know? Revered in the indigenous tribes. Those with the two natures were revered because of the fact that the native peoples saw them as the fullest representation of the Great Spirit. I wonder why we lost that. I wonder why we lost seeing two natures as the fullest expression of the divinity of God. Jesus goes to this woman at the Samaritan well, and all of the stuff that can be preached out of that particular pericope of Scripture, all of the stuff that can be there, salvation, living water, all that stuff that we've heard sermons about, what we always gloss over is that the disciples walk up to him and say, "You're with a woman?" Because he wasn't supposed to be. Binary, you see. He was a man, stick with the men. She's a woman, stay with the women. But Jesus crossed over that boundary. We at least have that vision of Jesus crossing over the boundary of male and female and including females into the circle. Remember who the first disciples are that are at the tomb? Not the men. Where are the men? It's the women. So Jesus crossed that boundary and said, the women are welcome here. And even though we don't have scriptural reference of Jesus crossing a boundary and saying, if you are male and you identify as female, you are welcome, I would bet you, that if he were here today, he would be the first one to cross that boundary because he already set the example of crossing it. And it seems to me that what we should be, or possibly I shouldn't say should, but what we ought to be taking from the scriptures is the idea that where a boundary that was exclusive was placed, Jesus stepped across it, stomped on it, twisted it out, and kept going forward. That's where I think Jesus would be today. He would be in the midst of teaching us that if we're going to exclude anybody because they are different from us when it comes to the most taboo portion of ourselves, then we got some learning to do. We've got some work to do to understand what it means to truly follow the boundary breaker in the world, to open up the kingdom for those who don't fit the binary. Now, what I do want to mention to you is this interesting little fact that we heard another scripture today from the Apostle Paul in the book of Galatians, one of his earlier books. Earlier letters. And he says, because of Christ, there is no male and female. There is no free and slave. There is no Jew or Greek. Listen to Paul breaking down boundaries right there. Paul saying, there is none of that going on anymore. All that matters is what we started this sermon series with is, you are a child of God. You are a child of God. That's all that matters. There is no Jew nor Greek. There is no male nor female. There is no free nor slave. All there is child of God. So we have to ask ourselves, are we afraid because this subject, this gender subject, is still so volatile, so controversial in our world? Are we afraid to be like Jesus and Paul were? Are we afraid to stamp down that boundary and allow those people who are created in the image and likeness of God that are different from us to be a part of the whole? And you know, the longer that I'm a preacher, the more I begin to realize that the actual question we only have to ask ourselves is this: am I afraid to do what Jesus did? Am I afraid to be like Paul was? We ask ourselves that question, maybe none of these boxes would be here in our lives. Maybe we would, as Lecrae said, unmake the boxes, uncreate them. Now, before we go any farther, I'm about ready to wrap it up. I know, Glenn, you're watching the time for me. I do want to tell you that we don't want to leave here today with the mistaken idea that gender and sexuality are the same thing, right? Sexuality is how you are attracted to and how you express love in the world. Gender is how you present what you know who you are. That's the difference. We have this lady, what is her name? Dr. Margaret Nichols said that this is the easiest way to remember it. Biological sex, birth assigned parts based on hormones. Gender identity, or affirmed gender, internal sense of who we are. Gender expression, how you want to manifest it in the world. But I think before we really have the opportunity to begin understanding gender, we have to be willing to let go of this binary. We have to be willing to let go of the binary that we've lived with all of our lives, that male and female are here, and that male is above female. And as I've pointed out already this morning, there are still churches in this world teaching that male is above female. You know that old joke, don't you? God created men, and then he was done after he created female, right? He kept creating because he wasn't satisfied with the first one. That's not true. But we say it as if it is, right? We go on with that joke because that's a way to fight back against this binary system in a way that we think is socially acceptable. It's not. God created. End of story. God created. So what I'm going to challenge us to do is to do this. If this subject is a little bit uncomfortable for you, join the club. It's a little bit uncomfortable for me because I thought I knew about it. I don't know anything about it. If it's a little bit uncomfortable for you, then perhaps maybe what we need to do is this. We need to take some books off of shelves and we need to begin to read them. We need to go to YouTube and we need to type in gender identity or gender expression. You will get all kinds of videos by all kinds of people who have been working on this subject for longer than a year, and they will begin to explain it to you. If this subject is something that you never even thought about, maybe it's time that we all start learning about it. This church, a month or so ago, said that if somebody walked through the door that was transgender, they would be affirmed here. I want to know that's true. I want to believe that's true. That we would not go right back into those binaries and say, you were born a boy, you should be a girl, or you shouldn't be a girl. You were born a girl, you shouldn't be a boy. I want to know. I want to believe that we will be that kind of Christ followers. But I also know that we need to learn and continue to learn, to continue to understand just how revolutionary Christ was in this world with breaking down these boundaries, these boxes that we use so that we have great control in this world. Now, let me ask the question again. Any men here going to wear a man bun? Maybe that's the place to start. I should have went out and got a bunch and clipped them on your head, right? But the other question is any woman here willing to do any kind of male, quote unquote, male-oriented thing in the world? Willing to work on cars? Willing to do any of that sort of stuff? Because maybe the change needs to come with us becoming a little bit more comfortable with doing something that we haven't been told all of our lives we weren't supposed to be doing. Maybe it's just that tiny step. Amen.